So students, after discussing the functioning of various parts of human eye, let us watch a small video in which we are able to figure out the term that is known as the power of accommodation. After watching this video, you will be able to understand the power of accommodation, up to what extent we can see the things, the nearby as well as the far objects. So let us watch.
When you're focusing on something very close to us like this Batman, things which are far away from us like this tree gets blurred. Similarly, if you were to focus on the tree, then Batman gets blurred. Why does this happen? Well, the short answer is because our eye keeps changing its focal length. Well, in this video, we're going to explore exactly what it means, why, and how it does that. To understand this logically, we'll first take a look at a human eye. Now, an eye is a really complicated thing with a lot of parts in it, but we're going to ignore almost all of them and only concentrate on the ones which are relevant to us. And one of them is this lens. It's a convex lens that converges the incoming beam of light. And the second important part is the retina. The retina is like a screen which has all light sensitive cells. And here's the key thing. If you want to see something clearly, if you want to focus on something very clearly, then the rays of light from that object have to be focused on the retina. So I repeat, to see something very clearly, the rays of light have to be focused on the retina. So let's go ahead and draw a principal axis. And let's see what happens when we are looking at that tree which is far away. Suppose we took a point on this tree and drew a couple of rays of light coming towards our eye. Since this tree is really far away, the rays of light that are coming towards our eye are almost parallel to the principal axis. Here they are. Let's see what happens to them after refraction. Well, if you look at this ray, it is passing through the optic center, and the ray of light passing through the optic center goes undeviated. Means this ray will go and hit our retina at this point. What happens to this ray of light? Well, this ray of light will bend downwards because it's a convex lens. It will converge the beam of light. And in order for us to see this tree clearly, if we are focusing on this tree, then this ray of light must meet up with this ray at the retina. They have to get focused at the retina. So our eyes will bend these rays somewhat like this. Alright? This means that the principal focus of our eyes must be at this point. Does that make sense? Because any parallel ray of light after refraction through a thin convex lens passes through the principal focus. And so this has to be the principal focus of our eye. So right now, that is the principal focus of our eye, and this is the focal length. This distance is the focal length. Now let's see what happens to Batman. Alright, remember Batman is really close to us. This distance is not to scale, that tree is far away. And also remember that our eyes are right now still focusing on that tree. So the principal focus is right over here. So let's draw a couple of rays from Batman and see where those rays of light get focused. Again, one ray of light passing through the optic center goes undeviated. And the ray of light which is parallel to the principal axis, well, that will just bend like before, passing through the principal focus. And here is our principal focus. So this ray of light will hit the retina over here, and as a result, can you see the two rays of light are not being focused on our retina? They might get focused somewhere behind the retina. And that's the reason, and as a result, Batman will not get focused right now. And that's exactly what's happening right now. The rays of light from this tree, which are almost parallel to each other, the green rays of light are being focused onto our retina, but the rays of light from that Batman is not being focused, so Batman is blurred. So this is the case when we are looking at things which are far away, when we are focusing on things which are at large distances. Okay, now let's say you want to focus on Batman. What should your eyes do? Again, if we just look at the ray diagrams, we can figure this out. Now, if you want to focus on Batman, that means these rays of light must meet on the retina. Well, this ray of light will always go undeviated, so nothing can be done over here, which means that our eyes must bend this ray, all the way to meet here. And that can only happen if this were the principal focus. So in other words, when you are focusing on Batman or something which is very close to you, the principal focus comes closer. The focal length of your eye gets shorter. So this is now the new focal length. And now what happens to the rays of light from tree? Well, I'm pretty sure you can guess now. The rays of light from the tree are parallel. Again, this ray goes undeviated. It doesn't matter what the focal length is. But now this ray of light, well, it has to pass through the focal length, and so it'll also bend the same way. And as a result, now the rays of light from the tree are no longer focused on the retina. They are now being focused over here. And that's why when you focus on Batman, the tree gets blurred. And this is the situation when you're focusing on things close to us at short distances. So the key takeaway is that when your eyes are focusing on something at short distances, very close to you, they require short focal length. And while focusing on something at large distances, they require large focal length. And it is for this reason, when you're focusing on one object, the other one gets blurred. So we've pretty much answered our question, but let's go a little bit deeper. Well, first of all, this ability that our eyes possess to change its focal length, it's given a name. It's called accommodation. Accommodation. So accommodation is the ability that our eyes have to change its focal length depending upon what it's focusing on. Well, the big question is, how does our eye decrease its focal length? What does it do? Well, think about it. If you want to decrease the focal length, then the rays of light must bend more. Does that make sense? And what does this bending depend on? Well, the bending really depends on the curvature of our lens. More the curvature of the lens, more will be the bending. So in order to decrease the focal length from here to here, the lens must be more curved. And how does that happen? Well, this is not a glass lens. Obviously, we don't have a piece of glass in our eyes. This is a lens which has some fluid inside it, and so its shape can be easily changed. So our eyes do that. They make this lens more curved by just pushing on it from the top. So when it gets pushed, it gets squashed a little bit, and as a result, it ends up getting bulged. So something like this happens. See here. So it'll get bulged a little bit, and as a result, the lens is now more curved than before. Of course, I've exaggerated over here. And that's how the focal length decreases. And similarly, if you want to increase back the focal length, bring it back to what we had before, well, then you let go of this pushing force. It'll snap back over here. So this is how accommodation happens. But then we can further go ahead and ask, well, what's making that? What's pushing this lens? Well, there are a couple of muscles over here which I haven't shown. Let me show that. It's these muscles called the ciliary muscles. The name is not so important, but they are the ones which are responsible for pushing on this lens and decreasing its focal length. And again, if they release that pushing force, the lens snaps back to its normal position, and now the focal length increases. Of course, in reality, it's a little bit more complicated than that, but you don't have to worry too much about this. So as the objects come closer and closer, the ciliary muscles start pushing onto it to make that lens more curved so that the focal length decreases in order to see the object. Alright, one last thing is that if our Batman were to come even closer, then if you drew the same ray diagram again, the focal length should get even shorter. Closer the distance, shorter the distance of the object, shorter is the focal length. And that means our lens must get even more curved. But there is a limit to how much your lens can curve, and therefore there is a limit to how short the focal length can be. Suppose now we have reached the limit. Then this is the nearest distance at which you can keep an object and you can still focus it. And that point we usually represent as D, and we call that as the near point. So near point represents the shortest distance at which you can keep the object and still focus it. And now if you kept the object, if Batman were to come even closer, well, now the ciliary muscles can't push anymore. We have reached our limit, and so we cannot shorten the focal length anymore. And as a result, this ray of light cannot be focused on the retina anymore. It can't, because it needs to have a smaller focal length. And so as a result, the focal length will not get shortened anymore, and so the rays of light will no longer get focused. And you can test this. Just take your finger and bring it very close to your eye, and you will see you will not be able to focus it. The near point distance really depends on a lot of factors, but the average distance we usually take that as 25 centimeters. This means any object kept closer than 25 centimeters cannot be focused on our retina. Remember, this is an average distance. It doesn't mean every eye has a near point of 25 centimeters. Some eyes will have smaller than that. Some eyes will also have larger than that. Interestingly, our eyes don't have a far point. There is no limit to how far an object should be to bring it to focus. Even if the object was at infinity, for example stars at large distances, you can still bring them to focus. This is the maximum focal length that our eyes have, and so those rays can be easily focused over here. It's only the minimum distance that matters to us. That's the near point that matters to us. So to quickly summarize everything, our eyes adjust its focal length depending upon how close or how far the objects are to bring them to focus, and this phenomenon is called as accommodation. But there's a limit to the accommodation. If the objects come too close, then your eyes cannot decrease the focal length anymore, and so it'll just be blurred.
So students, this is known as the power of accommodation of an eye. Now from this we are figuring out some things, some points, that the near point of eye is 25 centimeter, the far point for a healthy eye is the infinity, and our range of vision lies between this 25 centimeter and the infinity. And the power of accommodation of the eye is basically the ability of the eye, that is the eye lens, to see both near and distant objects by adjusting its focal length. Now after this, our next topic is the facts about the power of accommodations. After watching this video, now you must be able to clear the facts, like the ability of eye lens to adjust its focal length is called accommodation, but the focal length adjustment with the help of ciliary muscles can be decreased up to a certain limits only. Beyond that, if we are going to decrease, in that case we are not able to see the clear and distinct image of that object. So beyond a certain limit, we can't adjust the focal length of our eye lens. Now this is obtained by the help of the ciliary muscles, of course. So we are obtaining this accommodation or the power of accommodation with the help of ciliary muscles. Now let us see a table. Although these values or table is not in your syllabus, but this is just for your knowledge, that if the medium is air, in that case the refractive index is 1, that is the reference we are taking. For cornea, this refractive index is 1.376. For aqueous humor, it is 1.336. For the lens, it is 1.42. And for vitreous humor, it is 1.336. This is just for the sake of your knowledge and not to be remember for your exam point of view. So here we had discussed what power of accommodation is, how we can adjust the focal length with the help of ciliary muscles, how it happens when we are focusing on nearby objects, the far objects get blurred, or vice versa. And similarly, you must have seen these features in cameras as well. So whenever you are focusing the objects with the help of camera on nearby, the far objects get blurred. And this is a very beautiful feature in a camera. So again we can say that the camera and eye both are similar to each other in some extent. Not in some, in so many extent they are similar to each other. Now, after discussing about this power of accommodation, let us again find out how much we had learned about the functions of various parts of human
Our
eye.
eyes enable us to see all the beautiful things around us. In this video, we're going to see the structure of this eye, the things that make up our eye. When we look at our face, it looks somewhat like this. This is my poor attempt at drawing a face. But if we were to concentrate only on the eye and get rid of all the skin, then we will be left with a ball. And that ball is usually called the eyeball. Now, let's look at this eyeball from the side and let's assume it is transparent so that we can see inside. Here it is. So we'll look at the different major parts of our eyes and we'll also see what each one does. So let's start with the one that is most visible to us, this one. this structure. This is called the iris. The iris. And when people talk about the color of the eye, they're actually talking about the color of the iris. So when light hits our eyes, the light that falls on our iris gets reflected. And the color of the light that gets reflected totally depends upon the pigment that makes it up. In this case, it is green, and so we would say that person has green eyes. In my case, for example, it is brown, so my iris reflects brown light, and so my eyes are brown in color. But notice our iris has a hole in its center, and that hole is also given a name. It's called the pupil. So let's just write that down somewhere over here. That hole is called the pupil. And as you can see, the pupil is through which the light enters into our eyes. So through the pupil, light will enter into our eyes, and this is what enables us to see things. Now, our iris has a very important job. Its job is to control the size of this pupil, the hole. And that's because during the daytime, or when the ambient lighting conditions are very bright, then there are a lot of rays of light that are hitting our eyes. So we wouldn't want too many rays of light entering our eyes, because in that case, that might damage our cells. So in such a case, what we'll do is our iris will make its hole smaller. The pupil becomes constricted so that it only allows the required amount of light to enter our eyes. On the other hand, if the ambient lighting conditions are very dark, so let's say it's evening time or night time, or you're inside a dark room, now there won't be many rays of light hitting our eyes in the first place. Now we would want to open up that pupil, otherwise we won't be able to see anything. And so in such case, the pupil opens up, the hole opens up, allowing the light to enter. And you can do this experiment at your home. Just stand in front of a mirror in a dark room. Your pupils will now be dilated. And just flash light into your eyes, and you will see immediately that pupil will get constricted, become smaller in size. Alright, now let's get rid of the iris so that we can see the other parts of the eye. So now we are only seeing a section of the iris. It's the same iris with the hole in between. Alright? So let's look at the other parts. This bulged part of the eye, which is in front, is called the cornea. So this is called the cornea. And over here we can see a lens. This is called as the lens of the eye. So it's just called the lens. Let's write that down. This is called as the lens. And the space between the cornea and the lens is filled with a watery kind of a liquid. And it's called the aqueous humor. It's called aqueous because it's watery. And if you look at this carefully, we can now see that this cornea, along with the aqueous humor and the lens, they're all convex shaped. So the cornea and the lens together form a converging lens system. And so whenever you want to concentrate on a specific object, their job is to make sure that the light from that object gets focused right at the back part of our eye, because it's the back part where we have lots and lots of light sensitive cells. So the back part of the eye is completely covered with light sensitive cells, which we are seeing over here in red. And so this whole thing is also given a name. That's called the retina. Let's write that down as well. So let's write that down. This light sensitive cell covering, cell lining, is called retina. And so in order to see anything clearly, the light from that object must get focused exactly on the retina. If it doesn't, it'll look blurred to us. And what do these cells do? Well, these cells, once light falls on them, they convert light into electricity. And finally, those electrical signals are carried from the retina all the way to our brain through some nerves. So there'll be some nerves that carry all these signals. The nerves will connect to all the cells of the retina, and all these electrical signals is carried to the brain, and this bundle of nerves are called optic nerves. And then our brain, the command center, receives these electrical signals, does a lot of complex processing, and it's eventually able to figure out where those light rays came from, and then it constructs the image of the world around us. The whole thing is super complicated. Our brain is super complicated, but it's also pretty amazing how it's able to do all of this. And by the way, the space between the lens and the retina is filled with a jelly kind of transparent substance called the vitreous humor. The word vitreous means looks like glass or kind of like glass. Of course, it's not made of glass, it's made of organic substance. But just like glass, it is pretty transparent. So it's a jelly-like transparent material, and its job is to maintain the shape of our eyes. Without this humor, our eyes could get easily crushed under the weight of the stuff that is on top of it. So the vitreous humor is a transparent jelly-like substance. The aqueous humor is also transparent, but it's watery kind of substance. And the last thing we'll talk about are these fiber kind of things that we see over here, which are keeping our lens in place. They are called the ciliary muscles. They have a pretty important job too. Their job is to be able to change the shape of this eye lens. Well, why do we need that? Well, we need that to change the power of our eyes depending upon how far the objects are that we are looking at. This will make sense if we draw some rays of light. So let's dim all of these things and consider some rays of light. Alright, imagine we are looking at objects which are very far away. Then the rays of light from that object will be parallel to each other. And in order to see it clearly, those rays must get focused onto the retina. So the ray diagram would look somewhat like this. Now the important thing is the amount of bending that is required. Notice that these rays have to be bent by this much amount so as to get focused on the retina. And this bending is done by this lens system, converging system. Now imagine that same object were to come closer. Again, to see it clearly, the rays of light must get focused onto the retina. So these rays will not change. But the incoming rays will now be diverging. And as a result, we will see now the required bending is higher. Alright, so just concentrate on the bending when the object comes closer. Here it is. Can you see that? The required bending is more. More refraction is needed, meaning more optical power is needed. So when objects are closer, we require more optical power, more bending. And when the objects are farther away, we require less optical power, less bending. So notice our eyes should be able to change its power depending upon how far the objects are. And that is accomplished by these ciliary muscles. So when the object is far away, the required power is less. And so the required curvature of our lens is also less. In such case, the ciliary muscles will be relaxed like what's shown over here. But when the objects come closer, since the required power is more, the ciliary muscles will start pushing on this lens to increase its curvature, as you can see. Like this. I've exaggerated the figure over here. It will push on the lens, increase the curvature, and as a result, it will increase the optical power. And that's how, depending upon the distance of the object from our eyes, the curvature of the lens will keep changing. And that is done by these ciliary muscles. And this phenomena where ciliary muscles change the power of the eyes by changing the shape of the lens is called accommodation. So that's their job. Their job is to perform accommodation. And by the way, we're going to look at accommodation in great detail in a future video. Alright, so don't worry too much about this accommodation as of now. So that's pretty much it. So let's quickly summarize what we learned. We saw that the cornea, the aqueous humor, and the lens together form a converging system whose sole job is to focus rays of light onto the retina. The retina contains light-sensitive cells whose job is to convert light into electricity. These electrical signals are carried out by optic nerves. Their job is to carry the signal all the way to the brain so that the brain can process the information. The jelly-like substance, the vitreous humor, maintains the shape of our eyeball. The iris regulates the size of the pupil, which in turn regulates the amount of light that enters our eyes. And finally, the ciliary muscles regulate the power, optical power of our eyes depending upon the viewing distance.
So students, this is all about the function of the human eye, that is each part of the human eye, as we had already discussed. So we had a look on the function of human eye through a video over here. So from these video, what we are going to figure out, that is about the common terms which we learned from the function and the structure of human eye. And the common terms are: number one is the power of accommodation of eye, that is its ability to adjust the lens both for the near as well as the distant object. So this is done by the ciliary muscles. They adjust the focal length of our eye lens. Next one next one is near point, and the near point is, that is the minimum distance at which the eye can see objects clearly, and it is nearly 25 centimeter. As we had seen in the video that this near point vary from person to person. So for a healthy eye we are taking the average of that, and that is 25 centimeter. The far point is the farthest distance up to which the eye can see, and we know that this is infinity. Now this is infinity because the distance of far object is very far as compared to the focal length of the eye lens. That's why the far point is taken as infinity. And the last one is the range of vision. For a normal eye, the range of vision is from the near point to the far point, that is from 25 centimeter to infinity. In next classes, we'll discuss about the defects of eyes, various kinds of defects of human eye.